Live. Oh, it looks like okay. So we're going live now. I'm gonna double check and make sure we are on Instagram. Okay, Naizon Rakto. Check that we are on Instagram. Again. Stala live di Instagram. Nangad sa bitsek. Di YouTube lokwe. Again. All right, it's the gigi. It's the gigi. Again, YouTube lokwe. Again, Maulek. All right, Zan, Facebook. Again. All right. Matsotsoto, Biba, Zaposti. Okay. All right. Biba. All right. Half a day, todos hamzo buena hudzong estige un nuevo na episode Fanatsu. Wahi host midzutalo si Michael Luhan bava. But then I am so happy. So, mega na mambunito zan man malati na tautaw. Man matu ni magi para Fanatsu. So many wonderful people come through for Fanatsu, but my guest here for Fanatsu is one who, if we had a punch card for Subway sandwiches, he would definitely get one because he is one of our most long-standing guests. My party here, Ed Alvarez, has been on Fanatsu from the very beginning when Manny Cruz interviewed him. And then even when it was Lawrence Lezama, who was in charge of Fanatsu, we brought Senor Ed here, Sipari Ed here, to talk about his reflections on the Fanogi March and so many other issues. And then even when after the pandemic and I took over, we've brought Ed Alvarez here to talk about dispelling myths about decolonization. After his father, Joe Rosario Alvarez, passed away, we brought him on just to talk about reflecting on his father's experience as a war survivor, one of the first in the generation of Chamorros to go into the Air Force, to talk about how we need to talk to our elders, get their stories, but also, Ed talked about unpacking the trauma of his father's war memories and his Vietnam memories too, and how that came together in his father's life and how we need to talk to our elders about those things too. And so Ed has been one of our most consistent guests here on Fanatsu, and he is somebody who has gifino Ingles, mega tihongnya, as they say in English, he's had lots of hats, but I know him best as my pari and as the former executive director for the Commission on Decolonization, as somebody who, after there was no activity at the government level and for decolonization for an entire government, governor's administration, Ed was the one who helped restart it under the Calvo administration. And so I'm very happy that he has joined me here today to talk about the state of our island, to share some of his thoughts, his opinions as somebody who's represented Guam at the international level, who has worked in the justice system at Guam, who's worked at Adaloop, who's seen a lot of things, who's worked with some of our most influential leaders in the second half of the 20th century. And so I'm always glad for a chance to hang out with my pari here and talk and share some of the reasons why Guam is more Gifinonya Sihara, we're stronger than we think. We can do more than we think. How do we get there, though? And so, si Zeus Masitatlu, pari, purifinatomo para este episode Fanatsu. Always grateful to be in conversation with you.
Right.
Yeah, and so for those of you who do not know you, let's start off with just an introduction. Introduce and Maisa, how put favor, tell us about your family, your Chamorro family. Did you grow up on Guam? Did you grow up elsewhere? And then, I said a little bit about your background, but just give us an overview of your life story. Put favor.
Okay. So my name is Edward Alvarez. I was born in Roswell, New Mexico in 1960, and we came to Guam in 1971. And when I first came here, I didn't like it because there was no fresh milk. There was no Montgomery Wards or Dillards or Sears. There's no escalators. And it was just, a throwback for me. But once I fought almost everybody in my village, we all became close. I began to really love Guam because of the people. We were all a very tight village. We helped each other. We did everything together. After typhoons, we would clean the village without being told together. We just were a very tight village. And I remember all of us played basketball. And one of our traditions was to, after midnight mass, you go to your house, change into your clothes, bring whatever you want to barbecue, and then we would play. We would play basketball from about 1 o'clock in the morning to when the sun rose. And that was a tradition of ours. But over the years, things happen. People join the military, people go away, and that died. But I really began to love Guam because of the people. And I see today, well, first of all, my career, well, I used to be the chief probation officer for the Judiciary of Guam. Prior to that, I was a researcher for the legislature. And then most recently, I was the executive director of the Commission on Decolonization or Political Status. And, Mike and I think we've known each other now for, well, 15 years, but we had began to talk years ago about the issues about Guam and ideas and solutions to make it better. And the title of this podcast is "The State of Our Island," and it's very proper now that we talk about this most pivotal election that's coming up, because whoever leads the island will be there until 2030, and the military buildup at that time probably be winding down, and we're going to have to see what we're going to do to diversify our economy and make it so that people can survive here. So that's where we're going on, and we see the state of Guam today as indicators that there's so much changing. One thing we notice right away is there's very few village fiestas. And back in my day, when in the 70s and 80s, and fiestas was very strong, especially in the South. But in prior years, I've gone to see how many fiestas are down in Arahan, Mariso, Umatic, and it's just not the same for now. Then we see also that there's homelessness on Guam. We never had homelessness. We never did until maybe the past 10, 15 years, but that was something we never had. And the last indicator is that people are leaving Guam, by the droves. People have gotten up and left to the States or to anywhere else. And the reason is, they just can't afford to stay here. Prices for housing is ridiculous. Food is very expensive, gas, as we all know. And so, this is why I was talking to Mike about the state of our island and, who might lead lead in Adelup, and, what plans should they have, if any, to, to see us through. So Mike and I had been talking since we met in 2011, and we have been talking about things that we felt could be done. And now that this is a very pivotal election, the state of the island is, it depends on who you talk to. For most of the people I talk to, needs improvement, but there are those who think it's not that bad, and those are, not the run of the mill residents on Guam. They're probably, upper class, middle class, upper class. But, back to the point. The point is, we think that, and so far as I see, having watched many podcasts and many, commercials and many candidates saying different things, we think that, Mike and I think that, this is an election for solutions. It's no longer, I think, but it's not a sentiment that's shared, voter wide. But I think platform in this election is going to be more important than it ever was. Previously in elections, platforms really didn't mean much. What meant the most is the candidate's ability to connect with the voting public. But I hear and I see more and more on social media that people are tired of lip service. You say there's crime on Guam and you think that we need to fight crime, or we need better housing, or we need better schools. A lot of people are saying, stop saying that. We already know that. What is your solution? Because they only have ideas. Saying that we need better schools, that's an idea, but telling how we're going to get it is different. And that's
Mm,
the one thing that a lot of people I talk to, voters or not, that are saying that they want to hear solutions, you know. So that's why, Mike and I had been talking years ago, right, Mike? Just years
oh
ago
yeah,
about
you got it.
what would we do if we were leading. And like, one of the things that Mike and I talked about early on in our discussions was tourism. You look at tourism today, and tourism is not anywhere near it used to be. And we thought at that time that it's time to rebrand our product. So one of the things that Mike and I thought about was, hey, why don't we have tourists make a personal connection? Why don't they stay with the local family? The local family takes them into their house, throws them a party, takes them around the island, takes them to the beach. They spend 2 or 3 days with them. And then, what will happen is probably we'll have a really good time with this local couple or local family, and most likely they'll come back because they made a personal connection. It's so true, with Mike and I and our friends in Okinawa. We went back there like 14 times because we know these people. Every time we come, they're so gracious in hosting us. Um, and I found out that there's a program in Okinawa that that does this. They pair military families with local Okinawans. And there was a website that I went on, and the people there were just nothing but, oh my God, these people are nothing what we thought. They're so hospitable, respectful. We had a great time at their house. We learned so much. And I was like, wow, why can't we do that here? That is something that is new, and I know, that based on what the board's made up of the Guam Visitors Bureau, that might be an idea that maybe won't roll over too well with them because they're hoteliers or transportation or restaurants, and this won't include them. But I don't think so. I think, especially the hotels, if they, use their heads, they can make a local experience at their hotel just as well as we can make a local experience at our house. So that
Mm-hmm.
was one thing we talked about, is that the tourism, you're rebranding the product and having a new idea instead of now, okay, we're going to give you coupons to go to, restaurants. We're going to subsidize your airfare so you don't have to pay that much. I don't think that's going to bring tourists back because all we're doing is making it cheaper for them, but we're not offering anything new.
Yeah.
My friend Dave Tidinko wrote a very, very good letter. I think I read it last month, and it was all about diversifying the product. It was all about getting them involved in cultural experiences, fiestas, festivals, venues. And that's a good start because that's where we need to go, I think. Because
Oh,
people in Japan,
yeah.
people are still
It
traveling. People are still
no,
traveling. They're going to places where there's good price and value,
mm-hmm.
and we're
Like,
not offering that here
no,
right now.
no, you make such a good point there, and I think uh and Por favor, en igual question midso, pega y me comments. Remember, if we've already got a few comments that have come in. But if you have questions, if you have comments, make sure you put them on the live streams wherever you're watching from. You can send them to me directly. But yeah, por favor, please join the conversation because this is an important one. Because, what I love about what you're suggesting there, Edson, is that you're there's so much lip service. And so many people say they don't like lip service, but then at the same time, when somebody actually gives them like ideas, then they also don't know what to do with those because they're so used to hearing lip service for so long. And when somebody says, "Oh, we need better schools," and they like the passion and the indignation, but if somebody actually has a proposal for how to improve schools, it's boring. It doesn't hit because they want somebody to be as frustrated and angry as they are. And so that's definitely one of those things, but to your point about tourism though, that's, I really like that because, one of the things that we see with our political status for a long time as a territory is that we demean ourselves, we look down upon ourselves, we devalue. But I think one of the things looking into the world today, we've had enough of trying to brand ourselves like we're somewhere else, or imagining that being where America's day begins is worth its weight in gold. Or even that because all of the things that used to pay the bills, tourism wise, other places can offer it cheaper, potentially better. Looking at places across Southeast Asia where all of the Asian markets now go to, where there are cleaner, nicer beaches with less people and they can get it for less. And it's newer and fresher. It's not the places that their grandparents went to get married or their parents go to for vacations. And so what you are reminding us though then is what can we do to make it so that it is unique and meaningful for the people that come here? And what that comes down to then is the culture and the memories. And when you get to that point, then it's not then about chasing the trends necessarily. It's about building up the community, supporting the culture. It's finding what's unique and meaningful and supporting that, which the tourism industry has not done for a very long time and really struggles with. And so, but I think you bringing tourism, and then you mentioned Dave Tydinko too. What he has talked about too is such an important thing that I wish more people were talking about. And I wish that a lot of the elected leaders this time around were really thinking about instead of just kind of complaining this or complaining that, it's like, no, there's real models that we can look at in other countries. There's real things that we could do. And you've given some examples just right now about ways in directions that we could focus our attention.
Yeah, because you look at it, nobody does hospitality like us. I've been to everywhere in Asia. I've been to a lot of places in the United States and, abroad. And there's just something about Chamorros. When I first came here in 1971, it was almost like, although, there was conflict and struggle and fighting, there was that sense of almost being immediately accepted. It's a feeling I didn't get anywhere else. If I go to Texas or Florida, people treat me like, oh, you're just passing through. But here on Guam, when we meet someone, it's from the heart. And I haven't experienced that anywhere else. But that's why I think we need to start focusing on ourselves. Don't be embarrassed to be, a representative of your island. We have that time on Malone, and people like, they're shy about it, coming out. They think someone will say something about them, but I think, really, we need to invest in our own people. And you think about having a homestay or some kind of venue where tourists are put in with families. Of course, we need to vet these people and make sure that, they're up and up people. But you think about doing that, putting them in a family, you know, and having JVB subsidize this. Uh, because I think really we're spending so much money on marketing Guam abroad. And I think it's in the millions that we pay marketing firms to get tourists for us. I don't think that is the case anymore right now. I think that the better way to use that money is start fortifying local people's residents, start fixing it up, start paying them for having tours at their house. And the perfect population for this is all the retirees. They have the time to do this. And the good thing about it would be the money would stay on Guam. Because that's been a long complaint about tourism on Guam, where they come here on a Japanese plane, they stay in a Japanese hotel, they do a Japanese tour, and in the end, all the money goes back to Japan. Or the tour was booked in Japan, so it never made it here. So, I always thought that, we're so nice and so accommodating that we've shortchanged ourselves in what we're worth, for whether it's tourists here or whether it's the military impacting our environment. We have shortchanged ourselves in what we're worth and what we're sacrificing to have someone else be successful. And right now, I think we need to get a better deal with tourism and the military buildup. That's, with the military buildup, I hate to say it, we're not going to stop it. But we need to really assess what's fair for us, because I don't think we're getting it. Of course, there's that misnomer of, what are you people complaining about? There's billions and billions and billions of dollars coming here every year. Yeah, that's true. But it ain't staying here. We know that. If that money was staying here, we'd have a Simon Sanchez built. We'd have no problems with roads. We'd have hospitals all over the place. So that's a misnomer. Yes, billions of dollars are being invested here, but they're going to those US contractors who have big, big contracts, and they're going to do their work, make their money here, and they're going to send the money back to where they're headquartered at. They're not going to circulate it here. And I think that's unfair for us, that, you come here, you're affecting our environment, you're affecting our way of life, you're affecting our political status, and we get virtually nothing. Maybe 10%, maybe. I couldn't find any, statistics on how much comes in and stays here through taxes or fees. I can't. I didn't find it. But to me, that misnomer about, what are you people complaining about? We give you billions of dollars, and you got to follow our rules. Okay, but what are you giving us for being a bigger target from China and Korea? What are you giving us for impacting our environment? And that's why, you have a lot of young activists stepping forward, because they see this inequity. They see that it is not a fair deal.
No, c'est juste massing. It's I think the transition in the conversation to the military, buildup and our political status is an important one, because I think especially now when we're talking about political leaders, and I think one of the main things that I want from my political leaders, even if they might have different proposals, different politics, different ideas, though, at least here on Guam, is that I want them to understand our political status. And I want them to take our political status seriously. So I don't want to have a senator or a governor or a delegate who thinks that just because we call ourselves Where America's Day Begins, then that means that America knows who we are and cares about who we are. I think that we should be serious about, we're a territory. We matter to people who want to build bases, people who want to do missile defense. We matter to World War II buffs, but for the majority of the people, they don't know who we are. They don't care. And so we shouldn't pretend.
Being a territory is, it's a nice front for the word colony. We are a colony. The United States listed us as a colony. We didn't give ourselves that name. That was a name given us to, when you're a historical victim of colonialism, you don't get to decide very much. And a lot of times you're not even at the table to decide anything. I mean, you look at that news cast yesterday with the military wanting more land. after they had already committed years ago that they won't be taking any more land, and now they want more land. It's a very, very military tactic. We'll tell you what you want to hear, but later on, we need more land for the missile defense system. And, some money's been set aside in the Senate, or I don't know where it was, but, I was like, wait a minute, you guys just committed to us that there will be no more land taking. You already own a third of the island. What more can we do for you? Land is a premium. And that's just the part of the way. I mean, yes, and don't get me wrong, Mike. I'm not anti-military. My dad was in the Air Force. I understand and see the good things they do for this community. Like, they kept the land that they took. A lot of it's pristine. A lot of it's still the way it was when they took it. They do a lot of community service projects for us. They help out with schools. They help out with cleanups. I'm not anti-military, but there's another side of that story. And the other side of the story is we're never at the table to discuss things that affect us directly. I mean, look at now, you look at the sea mining issue. That all of a sudden now, they they decided, oh, well, but we're still going to do it. And not only that, but that was that other issue. Oh, taking us off the downwinders. There were people that suffered nuclear fallout on Guam. We were on the list, and all of a sudden they took us off for compensation. They took us off without even telling us. And those are the kind of things that really piss me off. Is that, yeah, okay, you're the big old this and that, but hey, we matter too. Don't treat us like we're any less. And that goes, it transits over to our feeling as Americans or North Americans. We can't be disrespectful to the Central and South Americans because they were Americans long before the North Americans, and that's true. But they, a lot of people think, oh no, we're and you see a lot of podcasts and documentaries. People on Guam are U.S. citizens. We're partial citizens. We're jurisdictional. We're not full American citizens or North American citizens. We can't vote. We don't have a representation in Congress or the Senate. We don't qualify for many federal programs just because we're a colony. We're not true, full United States citizens. We're not. But that narrative goes around. Yes, we are. You have a U.S. passport. The U.S. passport doesn't mean you're a true, full U.S. citizen. That just means you have a passport. And we know it. It's true. Do you vote for president? No. Do you have a representation of somebody who has a vote in Congress and Senate? No, we don't. So you can't say we're full U.S. citizens. You can't. And I'm just tired of all the misnomers. The misguided narratives of you people are U.S. citizens and all this money's coming to you and you should be grateful to us and yeah, read your history.
No, it's such a good point. It's such a good point because if we look at what America receives from Guam and what Guam receives from the United States,
Lopsided.
It's fairly lopsided because
Yeah.
if you think about what it means to give up 1/3 of your entire island, if you think about what it means that your sovereignty is non-existent, if you think about what it means to be put in the crosshairs of enemies of another country and that you don't have any say over what that country does, and then you're not even compensated within a reasonable amount for what that is. You're just allowed into federal social programs at a limited percentage, not even a full percentage. That's the thing, is that because Guam is a territory, it's not even allowed to fully participate in them, but you're allowed at a limited percentage. And so
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like, well, we should be grateful for it, but it's like, oh, I mean, you should ask a lot of other people in the world, what would it mean if 1/3 of your entire territory was given over to another and that they could build bases on it, they could build missile defense on it, put offensive weapons there, defensive weapons there. They could open up the ocean around you for deep sea mining, that they could open up the waters around you for commercial fishing and then make money off of that, that they could do all of these things without your permission
Yeah.
and then throw you food stamps, throw you student loans. And then would you feel like that was enough, even if whatever they give you is less than
Yeah.
a fraction of a percent of what they spend every year? But for you, it means selling off all of your resources, putting your island in danger. And for them, it's a fraction of a penny.
Mhm.
That's all you get. But for you, you're willing to sell everything for it. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
You
I
know,
would rather have more control.
but historically, Chamorros are, very hospitable, very accommodating, very patient. But I think we've reached the end of that with what's going on now. I think people, especially the young generation, people like Monica Flores and Victoria Longueuil, they realize that there's inequity, and that has to be spoken about, resonated, and hopefully, some action taken. Uh, I just, it was appalling to me to know that, oh, there's money now in the Senate for, acquiring more land on Guam. And Robert Underwood was on TV saying, well, will Jim Moreland be at that meeting? Will he be on the table? And, historically, no, we're not going to be on the table. We never are. We never are. And, I think history will repeat itself unless there's some national outcry from us saying, hey, you got to stop treating us this way. This has been going on for 80 years or whatever, you know, and I just think that, when all is said and done, the people of Guam are going to have to, whether it's 2030 or 2035, they're the ones who are going to be left here. And so the question is, what will we do now to ensure that when that time comes around, 2030, 2035, that we have done enough to preserve our way of life and our culture and our language? That's the question. Have we done enough? Because it's easy for a lot of us to say, you know what, I'm retired. I'm just going to go travel, enjoy the world, and let you other people fight it out. I can't. I have a hard time doing that. That I love Guam so much. It's done. It's made me who I am. With being hospitable and being respectful and being accommodating. But and I don't want that way of life to go away. And I think we talked about this, Mike, a long time ago, is that our way of life is disappearing. So now we see the indicators with the homelessness, with the disappearing of village fiestas, and the people leaving Guam. Those indicators are there. Although you know what, there is some bright side. There's festivals now that are developing, the mango, the papaya, okay, but that has to go further into tourism and saying, all right, this day we'll have 400 tourists come to the mango fiesta. It'll be events sponsored by GBB, and there's all kinds of ways to make this a memorable and a repeatedly attended festival. So it's not gloom and doom for us, but I think it's pivotal that we begin to say, hey, what about us? Who's going to take care of us? Because all throughout our history, someone else has been taking care of us, but someone else has been colonizing us too. It's a two-way street, and about the military land that the military took, well, that was an illegal land taking because we weren't even partial citizens of the United States at that time. They still took that. They still took all that land. And then they gave us the Organic Act and said, okay, you're partial citizens now. We can refile the deeds because now you're partly U.S. It's all that thing, is done very subtly. And, and I hate to say it, but I'm just going to speak the truth. The military doesn't love us. They don't love us. They love what they can get. And I have to give them credit. They've been tactful about it, but I think we've enough years has passed and we know the game now. We know the game better than they did 40, 50 years ago. So, like they paid the FSM and Palau and the Marshall Islands, I think Guam is due.
Hungan, Hungan. Okay, so we've got some questions that have come in. Now, number one, and this is something that comes up a lot on Fanachu because we've got people that are watching from the Marianas, but also a good number that are watching from the diaspora. And so, what are your thoughts on the brain drain? And then, do you have any ideas about how to reverse the brain drain, how to bring people back home? We've talked about this before. We talked about this, for example, when Manny Crisostomo was doing the Manauta San Lago series, and he was celebrating Chamorros that have, left and then done great things in the States. But, how nice it would be if they came home, or if some of them came home, or if some of them, like you mentioned, when you're retired, after your kids have left the house, why not come home and give back to your island then? And so, what are your thoughts on the brain drain? And then do you have any thoughts on how we might do something about it to bring people back to the Marianas?
Yeah, I mean, this is a discussion you and I had years ago, Mike, about this, the brain drain. And it's timely that this question is being asked because I just met with a classmate who I've known since ninth grade. He went to West Point. He's a damn good uh, industry guy. He knows how to solve problems. And I met with him. I had lunch, and I said, "Hey, you need to come back and help us, man. Uh, we're not doing as good as we should at this time." And so that is my solution. Because I'm 65 now. A lot of the people I knew in junior high, high school, they're retired, and a lot of them are traveling the world, but I am reaching out to them and saying, please come back. We can use your expertise. So what I would do to further that effort is to put, some kind of campaign together to encourage those who have technical professional skills that grew up on Guam, love Guam, uh, and maybe because all along their profession didn't there was no job here for Guam. That doesn't mean they can't be used in other ways. What to me, what a college degree means is you can think, you can be trained. So I don't think that just because um, you're an authority in accounting that you can apply that your skill and your knowledge base and acumen elsewhere. I know there's a lot of people out there in the States, in the diaspora, that they have professional and technical skills, whether it's economic development, marketing. I even have a cousin who went to MIT, and he's a finance and engineering guy, and I want him to come back, because this guy has so much knowledge base from all the experiences he had in Fortune 500 companies. Surely there's a way to use him here. But getting them back, I think that only the ones that really appreciate Guam, who have an affinity and a connection to Guam, would consider coming back. But I would venture to guess there's a lot of people who left Guam but love Guam. Getting them to come back, now that's a different story. But I'm hopeful, that top quality professionals will come back, local people who went to public school, graduated from here. I'm hoping, or at least in some way, indirectly assisting us on, on the road to recovery. What do we do for economic development? What do we do for finance? What do we do? You know, I think people, still love Guam.
Mm. I think no, and it's a good point. We see it, for example, in the last two typhoons in the Marianas, and it really didn't exist to that extent before, in my recollection and my understanding, where the typhoons hit and across the diaspora, people organized to send things back to help. There's concerts, there's all sorts of things because people in the diaspora feel like they want a connection home. They may not want to move home
Yeah.
because jobs are a different thing. And it's tough to give up Costco. You know,
Yeah.
it's tough to give up those sorts of comforts that you have, but or your health care if you need a certain level of health care, for example, or you know, if you like to go to the Vegas, yeah, it's tough to go, it's tough to give it up, but there's still the desire for a connection, and so I'm what I'm hopeful about is that we can develop networks like Tsinsuli and assistance networks so that those who are in the diaspora, it's not like back in the days where Chamorros in the Marianas, Chamorros in the States are like two different species. And we
Yeah.
kind of we kind of sit across the party from each other and we kind of talk smack about each other like, oh, they think they're better than us. We're better than them.
I mean,
Instead, we focus on what can we do to elevate the people wherever we are, you
yeah,
know?
I see a resurgence of the yearning to know about Chamorro culture. You see Hural, what they're doing, and the dancers and the festivals they have in the States, and people coming here, to reconnect with their roots. Um, I would venture to guess that a lot of people, Chamorros in the States, they feel they're just a number. They're not identified as anything. But I'm finding out that more and more as people who left for this United States or elsewhere. Um, First of all, wait, people who left Guam back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, it wasn't a choice they really wanted to make. It was economics. The SRF ship repair facility moved from Guam to San Diego, so a lot of these people left because that was their livelihood. But I don't think anyone really wanted to go. And whether it was the military, that was for economic reasons, for the most part, or it was for tradition. My grandfather was in the service, my father, so now me. But I don't think that people on Guam left in those earlier times who are now retired, and living their, twilight out. I don't think they really wanted to leave. In my village, geez, I knew everybody. I knew everybody in my village and in Chico. And now there's only one guy there that I know, and that's my neighbor, the former mayor of Chico, Robert Azama. Everyone else is gone, and you never heard from them again, or if you did, it was a, funeral or reunion. But I don't think people left Guam because they really wanted to go. And I was the opposite. I wasn't born and raised here. And I came here, when I was 10 or 11. And I don't know why everybody else left because I love this place. I haven't experienced anything like this in the States, because in the States, hey man, if you didn't have any money to eat, well, sorry, you're not eating. But on Guam, somebody would give you something and say, hey, let's go share. And that meant all the difference to me. That feeling of you're sharing, that you're close, you help each other. If my outside kitchen needed repair, my friends would be there helping. If they needed something, and it was a beautiful thing, Mike, back in those times. And I was telling you, my dad's Rosario is a Tembet, and we learned how to fish. And we would go, house to house, giving fish to those, when we had excess, which was almost all the time because the fish back there was so plentiful. And then, we come back, a few days later to our house, and there's a basket of avocado. There's a basket of, cucumber. That's the way it was. People just, I remember when we had weddings, the bride and the groom had to pay very little because your friends and relatives would bring all the food. And you would have tables of, coconut crab, pig, everything. And now that's not the case. And that's the primary reason why we don't have fiestas, because it's so expensive to put one on, that you're better off not doing it anymore because economically you can't. But back in those days, the resources were there, they were there to, all you needed to do is have the labor, to kill the pig and roast it and bring it to the party. But, I think we can get a lot of it back. There's some things that's never going to come back, but I just don't want to lose the language. I don't want to use the basic customs that we have, the inafamaulig, the guy respectu, the pangingi, those things like that. But I am proud to see that there is a resurgence of people wanting to, they buy tomorrow dictionaries or they're taking the class. And, Mike, thank you for, putting the class on that you did, for people in the States. It was very nice.
Oh, c'est juste merci. No, I mean, anything that I'm just happy to see these connections happen, the resurgence like you're talking about, because I mean, I can feel the changes that you're talking about too, but I'm also aware like that we need to do things to evolve like like to so one of the things too is like, I don't have a ranch, I don't have a garden, but what can I offer to people? I can teach language. Like that is one way that I can give into the community the way that people used to give into the community in the past. And yeah, and it's important too that, and so that's, that's one of the lessons that I've learned. And so, but
You know,
oh,
another
go
thing
ahead.
I was thinking about is, we depend a lot on the federal government for, school, public health, you name it. But another funding source that we have never thought about until you and I talked about this years ago is private foundation funding. There's all kinds of private foundations in the United States that give money for everything from law enforcement to maintenance of schools to, public health. There's over 116,000 private foundations. And that's a source of funding that we have never, ever, ever thought about. And that I think, it probably is going to be competitive. But I think if we get all the grant writers in GovGuam in one room and start prioritizing what we need to go after, I think we'll have some success. But that's a new idea that, that is we never thought of. But
Hungen.
I,
I
I
like
think
that.
it's something we should, and that's just the United States. There's private foundations all over the world, and when you look at in Japan right now, and we talk about tourism, there are 48 million Japanese who declared that they feel lonely. The government even has a division of it called the Ministry of Loneliness. So, I reached out to this lady who's the minister, and I said, okay, of the 48 million people, how many can travel? She said about 10%. So my thinking is, you know what? We do hospitality so well. You come to Guam, you're almost accepted immediately. Let's reach out and have these people start coming to Guam, whether you stay in a hotel or you stay at somebody's house. That is a base of tourists that we're not hitting.
No, I like that. I really like that because it adapts to where we are in the world today. People feel frustrated, they feel isolated, they feel like out of control with things. They're looking for things that are real. Because look at how we're attached to screens, there's so much that's AI generated in our lives right now. And so this is one of the reasons why, you know, preserving environment, promoting culture, and then kind of working to create an experience that is meaningful is important because if it's going to be something that they can get anywhere, well, they'll get it there. If it's
Exactly.
going to be something you can just download or you can just type it into the computer and say, beautiful beach. Oh, this is very nice. This is very nice. Or like there's lots of beautiful beaches in the world. So then what is it though
Yeah.
that we could provide? But I think you kind of discussed it earlier because a lot of the thinking that we have for so many things is very colonized, it's outdated, it kind of doesn't take ourselves seriously, built on old models. And even when we do try to change the paradigm, there's people that kind of trash it and say, we shouldn't, can't do that. We should do that. And so we do have another question that came in earlier, which is basically about, that it's the question though is supportive, saying that GVB really should promote culture at a grassroots level. But what do you say though to the naysayers who say that's a waste of money? Because I think that if you look online though, for example, internet trolls, Facebook trolls, for example, anything anything you put out there, they'll just say, oh, it's a waste of money. Why do that? Blah, blah, blah. And so I think sometimes people imagine they're very outdated. If it's not a big, huge hotel, it certainly can't be making money. And what you're talking about though is a much more diffuse way of spreading money around the economy, which
Yeah,
is
small.
exactly what we want, because in the past it was concentrated. A few companies got a lot of money. It was all in one place. But what you're talking about is, like, imagine if there was a program in which, whether it was a government or whether it was a private company, in which you could get assistance to set up for, homestays or, cultural exchanges. And then you can get like a grant or you can get a loan or something. And then people come over and you host them and they can pay you. It would be great to pilot something like that and try it out.
Yeah,
But what is your response though? Because
we said,
the questioner asks, that this is a great idea, but what about those people who say that culture is not enough or culture doesn't make money?
well, you can't say that until you try it. I mean, that's prejudging the concept already. I don't think so. I think if this works in Okinawa, we can do it better. No, hands down. We just have we can't just do nothing because we don't think it's going to work. We need to do something, and whether it's this or something else, we're the ones who are going to be here. We're the ones who are going to stay here. We need to fend for ourselves and stop depending on other people to fend for us and decide for us what's going to happen to us. We're already 80 years old, man. It's time for us to get on our own feet and find our own way. We've been under the United States, for the longest time. And I'm thinking this would be good for them because they were saying, okay, we don't have to give you billions of dollars anymore and go back, to all the U.S. contractors or that they take the money and go away. I don't think this way of being or being a naysayer, because what I realize about most naysayers is they don't do anything. They say no, it's just not a good idea. But I don't think so. I think if we know enough about hospitality to do it right, maybe we might have some minor problems, but I think we know how to treat people better than almost any other people that I've been with throughout my travels. So I don't, and that's what made me love Guam. It was the people, and a lot of there you see a lot of testimonies and hear a lot of testimonies of why the military loves Guam. The people are so nice. Oh my God, you know, I, this to not try it is the biggest failure. So,
Yeah,
if the naysayer says, it's going to be a waste of money, well, that obviously it won't include them.
yeah.
But
I
but
think
we need to do something
I
to
think
you know
one
to
one thing that I really like about what you're proposing though is just when one of the problems with the world today, like you look at the United States, the stock market is through the roof because people that are already rich are making a lot more money. But
yeah
if you are not rich, then you are probably not doing that well because all the costs are going up. And even if the cost of gas went down a little bit, everything that you pay for all still went up and it's going up. It's going to keep going up. And so people who are millionaires and billionaires are all getting rich, 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 rich. Everyone else is not. But what I love about what you're suggesting, though, is that it means that the pillar of Guam's economy, the economic benefits for that are spread out. But instead of the traditional way that they're spread out, which is that you get to work for the big companies in which there's a small amount of professional jobs and then there's a big amount of low-wage jobs. You know, now if you make it so that the tourist economy has more kind of small business opportunities, that it's more localized, it's not just Tumon based, but it's spread everywhere. Number one, that's exactly what Korean tourists have been asking for. You know,
Japanese too.
it's exactly what Japanese tourists have been asking for. The Japanese don't want their parents and their grandparents' experiences. They want something different. Koreans want something different. But it also means then that there's more chance for everyone else to share in the money that Guam makes from tourism, which
Exactly.
is better because everyone that's what we want. So that's what I love about what the way that you're thinking. And I
Mhm.
wish that more people would go in that direction instead of just complaining, instead of just saying we need more money or just, doing the kind of the lip service stuff. Real ideas, real ideas. I love that.
Yeah.
And so, Etson, we are just about out of time. We have about 5 more minutes. And
Okay.
so I wanted to give you, hold on. And so one more question, and then I want to give you a chance to close. I want to give you a chance to close. And so this is a question I brought it up at the beginning, and so somebody sent me a message kind of following up on following up what I had said earlier. And the question is to the issue of political status being an important issue for our leaders to know. Do you find that political leaders are knowledgeable about it, or do you find that political leaders don't? In your opinion, do you think that political leaders today are knowledgeable about it, or do you feel like they're not? Now you were executive director for Decolonization Commission for a while. You presented to elected leaders, you presented to a lot of different people's schools. Do you feel that the candidates who are running this year, that they're knowledgeable about it? Or do you feel that they're not knowledgeable about it?
I I feel they're not knowledgeable about it. Um, the senatorial candidates, the gubernatorial candidates, there's one candidate who gets it, and that's Josh Tenorio. He gets it. He understands it. But do I think a better question is how important do you think this is? I think this is the most critical issue we have because political status sets the ground rules of engagement between Guam and the United States. And the last time that this was done was when we got the Organic Act. We weren't on the table. We weren't there. We weren't able to represent ourselves. And if we're going if and this is it's ridiculous that this is an inalienable right, a God-given right, but we haven't been able to exercise it for strategic reasons, military, maybe a few others. But back to the question, no, they're not. They're not knowledgeable of it. In I haven't seen anyone talk about it in the breadth that you and I and a lot of other people that were on the commission can. And it's sad because, this is the most important issue, even above tourism to me and the military buildup. Our political status, our relationship with the United States is the crux. It's the crux of the matter. If we're on the table and can negotiate fairly about how we want to be treated and what's fair for us, then things will be a lot better. But you notice that political status is not an issue right now. It's still the same three. It's still education, public health, and public safety. Political status has remained out of the scope. But for those of us who are aware of the story, and aware of the inalienable right to be, decolonized from your colonizer, um, we know that this is right, and and over 80 countries and island nations have gone through this, and we're one of 17 or 18 who have not. This is way overdue. There's no excuse for it not happening.
C'est juste marché. C'est juste
Okay.
marché. And now I want to give you a chance at on just para ultimo na sinangan mo na your final thoughts. If you want to just close with anything, any words of wisdom that you might have. We had a few people that were very engaged. Jay Pasqua Hafade Jay Sumaskagidza, Alabama. He was tuned in. And he was very engaged. Sidus Masi, he says, I believe fiestas are diminishing because there's a shift from the focus on the good of the community, the song to the good of the individual. It's also costly, as you mentioned. He says the Jones Act needs to go.
Agreed.
And yeah, and so
In closing, the Jones Act was never meant to affect us. The Jones Act was meant to affect the shipbuilding industry of the United States. And what was happening was the ship owners were going to go to Korea and Japan to build their ships because they were much cheaper. So the shipbuilding industry in the United States said, okay, we're going to pass a law. We're going to use our lobbying power in Congress to pass a law that if you do buy your ship from Korea or Japan or any other foreign company, that ship would not be able to go to 2 consecutive U.S. ports. And that's what the Jones Act is all about. It wasn't meant for us. It wasn't meant, to affect us. But it's one of those federal law that one size fits all, so they applied it. And that's, it's just a wrong formula, man, because that really created a fabricated economy here on Guam for many, many, many years. And, us on Guam, we didn't know any better. We didn't know the impact of this federal law, but it does have to go, or at least, for now, I think a temporary exemption is right now, just until we get back on our feet economically and start diversifying. I think we can ask for that. Precedence has been set. They gave temporary exemptions for Hurricane Katrina, the Exxon Valdez oil spill. These exceptions have been made. The Jones Act does not apply to the U.S. Virgin Islands, and it does not apply to American Samoa and their territories in the United States too. That's unfair that it only applies to 2 of the 4, us and Puerto Rico. That's how I feel about it.
mm-hmm.
It's a bad law, and it's a race, it's a discriminatory law.
No, it's just Masi. Just Masi. Edson, do you have any final words that you want to share?
Yeah. What I just want to say to everybody is, get involved, find out what really is going on. Don't believe everything you hear in social media or the news. Do more research, do more engaging, talk to people who have a different perspective than the run of the mill people. Because, a lot of the people that we know, Mike, we speak the truth. It may be ugly, but we're speaking the truth. And we're speaking the truth by what we experienced and what history that you and I have lived through tells us.
Ungan biba. Aide. Sejus Masi pare. Podeste finatomo talo para este episode finatsu sejus Masi pari imen halomo pari sinangan mo pago. Za sejus Masi para hamzo todos ni omega zanume kung okeste episode finatsu. Este finakpo. Adios. Este ki manadli hitalo.